Well, hello there, little masters, and welcome to the Prancing Pony Podcast, where tonight, Shawn and I are taking a break from the action to give Sam plenty of time to renew his suspicions about Strider after the attack on Weathertop.
And we'll step into the common room here in just a moment. But first, I'm Shawn Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and I'm here with the Man of the West, who has walked far to find some Athelas leaves to heal us after the beating we're about to get, Alan Sisto.
Yeah, I got them right here, Shawn. It smells good in my booth, actually. Really nice.
I bet
very
it smells
refreshing.
fantastic. Why don't you make a little infusion of those for me? And,
there you go.
Pass them this way.
By the way, that's quite the exception to the rule, I must say. Spending 5 hours in this booth.
I don't doubt that your booth usually does not smell like fragrant Athelas leaves.
No, sadly, unfortunately, after a few hours in the summer, it does not. So, all that chatter can only mean one thing. Once again, we're going to do our best to answer some unscripted Q&A for you folks today. We have several of our patrons online with us here in the common room, and we've asked them to come with some of their very best questions. As always, we have no idea what they're going to ask us, so Shawn and I are going to be answering questions on the fly, as best we can, in our 7th, and that's hard to believe, Questions After Nightfall episode. Yeah, 7 quarters we've been doing this. Almost 2 full years. Pretty amazing.
And it's been a lot of fun. Well, somebody on Facebook recently pointed out that Harry Goatleaf, the originator of that phrase, Questions After Nightfall, isn't exactly a good guy. And, Alan, we did kind of wonder if we should change the name of this quarterly event.
Yeah, we kept trying to rehabilitate Harry's image, but it just can't be done.
It really can't be done.
No.
There's just too much damage that's been done there. But I think we decided we're going to keep it, right? We're going to take it back.
Right.
We're going to continue calling this Questions After Nightfall.
That's right.
And Harry's questionable loyalties aside, today it is our guest's business to ask questions after Nightfall, and it's our business to answer them.
Well, folks, as with previous Questions After Nightfall episodes, aside from possible edits for nervous coughs and time spent flipping through pages while we look for an answer, we will be presenting this as it was recorded live. Everything you hear in the show will have been recorded during this session.
And if that's right, you out there listening.
You over there in the red shirt
with the red shirt and the earbuds. If you would like to get in on the next one, go check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/prancingponypod. We'll be doing Questions After Nightfall episodes every quarter, and we'll be inviting patrons at the Elrond's Honorarium tier and higher to join us.
That's right. It's just one of the many ways we're saying thank you to our patrons, giving them the opportunity to get to know us a little better, make us laugh, publicly humiliate us. It's all better than falling off a table or getting stabbed by a wraith, really. So why don't we go ahead and get started with the questions? We'll unmute you in the order that we had you raise your hand so that you could ask questions. And as we do, please introduce yourself. Tell us who you are and where you're from, and then go ahead with your question. All right. Are we ready? Shawn, who's first tonight?
We are ready, and the first one up tonight is going to be Arthur.
All right. Well, Arthur, welcome to Questions After Nightfall. How are you tonight?
Well, very good. Thank you all very much for inviting me to this. My name is Arthur. I am in Baltimore, Maryland. Putting aside the unanswerable question of why a smart girl like Luthien would hang out with a dog when there's a perfectly serviceable cat available. A question that relates to the stuff we're reading right now. Our friends, the Black Riders, Captain Witchy's Freedom Patrol.
Captain Witchy's Freedom Patrol. I love that.
We know that they can sit on horses. They can knock on doors. Yes. They can hold swords. They hold up their clothing. How come Frodo has to be wearing the ring to be in danger of being seized by them?
Shawn, we touched on this a little bit, haven't we?
We touched on this a little bit in an episode that we've recorded, but that we have not aired yet. But I don't think we talked specifically about this question. I think we talked about how the cloaks
kind of the first half of that. Right. The clothes give, what was the phrase, form to their nothingness? Was that something out of
I think shape to their nothingness was, I think it was actually in the Council of Elrond.
Oh, yes, you're right.
Or many meetings, actually. It was in Lord of the Rings.
Many meetings.
Gandalf
I think
says
you may be right.
that the cloaks give shape to their nothingness. And so we talked a little bit about that and why they actually wear the cloaks as opposed to going around invisible. And we did say that wearing the cloaks, if it gives shape to their nothingness, it must allow them to interact with the physical world in a way that they can't if they're not wearing the cloaks.
That's correct. And that's certainly the implication. Yeah, that's the implication. I'm sorry. I just run right over you, Shawn. Welcome
That's
to the
right.
show.
Yep.
You were right. It is in many meetings. Gandalf is answering Frodo's question about why can we see their horses.
Mm-hmm.
And he explains, of course, they're real horses, just as the black robes are real robes that they wear to give shape to their nothingness when they have dealings with the living.
Mm-hmm.
The implication being they couldn't have dealings with the living if they didn't have some shape to their nothingness, i.e., riding the horses, they would have to be wearing their robes.
Right.
Because if they weren't, they wouldn't have shape. Therefore, they couldn't ride on the horses. Same with knocking on doors. But that doesn't answer really the bit about Frodo, does it?
No, it doesn't. I mean, looking at that same chapter, and I think it's the same scene, Gandalf says, "You were in gravest peril while you wore the ring.
Right.
For then you were half in the Wraith world yourself, and they might have seized you."
Yeah, you're right. If they have their robes on, couldn't they have seized him because they would be having dealings with the living, so to speak?
Yeah.
The only thing I can think of is that the ring at that point makes him even more tangible. Is that the way I'm looking at it here? Or is it that it makes him more, that's a tough one. What does the ring do that it wouldn't have done?
It has to be some sort of a spectrum where they can maybe touch him when he's not in the Wraith world, but when he is wearing the ring and he is half in the Wraith world, they can more than just touch him. They can actually grab him. But
perhaps keeping him in the Wraith world. Maybe that's it.
Maybe.
It's grabbing him and taking control of him as opposed to interacting with him, speaking with him like they did with the hobbits in the Shire, knocking on the doors, tearing up the bolsters and the pony, all of those things.
That's a good question, though. I mean,
very good question, though, Arthur. I'm trying to think. I think you're right, Shawn. You're onto something. There must be a spectrum that when you're in the Wraith world, there's even more that they could do. One wonders whether they would have been able to successfully stab him with the Morgul blade had he not even been in the Wraith world. I don't know.
I'm going to look at some of the research we did for that question that actually it's going to be in the episode that releases just before this one.
Right.
Let me see here.
Arthur, you got a little bit follow up there?
Yeah, because I note from looking through the appendices that there were cases in the past where Nazgul and specifically the Witch King attacked people. And I think, although it might not be in the canon per se, there was a steward named Boromir who was stabbed with I suspect was a Morgul blade, and he wasn't wearing a ring.
You're right. You're right. So they could interact with somebody even when they are not in the Wraith world. So what is it then that drives that ability to seize him as opposed to just wound him with a sword or...
That was when their master was still somewhat faded and hadn't gained his strength, so they were weaker then.
True. That would make sense, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at our notes that we put together for that other question, and it was a slightly different question. It was really more about their visibility versus invisibility, and so we really didn't touch as much on the tactile, their ability to seize and wound others. I don't know. I mean, it may just be that they could have seized him and kept him in the Wraith world. They could have, taken him with them.
Part of the hint might be in the line right following that. You could see them and they could see you. Remember, their ability to see, so to speak, to see people when people aren't in the Wraith world, is a little different, right? Aragorn describes them that we show up as shadows that only the noonday sun destroys. You can't really grab a shadow, right? I mean, if we're thinking about trying to grab something that's harder to see, that's not as clearly defined, perhaps the fact that he was visible to them in a much more clear way would have enabled them to do more than stab them, let's say. Like
maybe you can stab a shadow, but you can't grab a shadow.
You can't maybe grab one. I don't know. That's the only thing I can think of, is that somehow that wearing of the ring makes him more tangible in a way to the Witch King, and therefore more vulnerable to being seized. I mean, that's a tough one.
It has to be something like that. We may not be able to get much more concrete than that, but it has to be some sort of a spectrum or continuum of their ability to physically interact with Frodo, and it's greater while he's wearing the ring. Why? It might be hard to say.
Yeah.
Where on that spectrum, is the tipping point where suddenly they can grab him. I don't know, but it has to be something like that. But that is a really good question.
That is a great question, Arthur.
It is, and we may have to see if we can do some more research on it and maybe follow up on it later if we can find anything.
Yeah,
I'm trying to think if there's anything in Hunt for the Ring, but I don't think so. There's not much on the nature of the ring rates in that.
No, not really. Well, Arthur, I'm sure we didn't answer that to your full satisfaction, but that's probably the best we can come up with for now. Are you good?
Yeah, the point is to stimulate the thought process.
Mm-hmm.
You have done that. Thank you, sir.
If nothing else, we will try to revisit this when we get to mini meetings and say, hey, folks, remember back last season. And
that's right.
Let's see what we can come up with.
And we'll have plenty of time before we get there, too. Yeah, excellent. Excellent question. All right.
Okay.
Before we move on, Mark, you had raised your hand. Did you have some input on this question or a follow-up or something?
I think it was already taken into account by the way that the discussion flowed. No worries. But I was just going to point out that Éowyn fighting with the Witch King was definitely a physical battle.
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah, that's true.
I figured that wasn't.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, that speculation is not going anywhere. That's a dead end.
Okay,
so awesome. Thank you, Mark. That's a very good point. I mean, with Éowyn being certainly not in the Wraith world and yet very vulnerable physically to the Nazgul.
Yeah.
So at that point, of course, Sauron has gained even more strength. I mean, this is, right at the peak of his strength, it would seem. So perhaps that has something to do with it as well. I don't know. Boy, goodness, that's going to stick us for a while, isn't it?
It's gonna bug me now. I'm glad, as you said, Arthur, we're just, to stimulate the conversation, and I'm glad we did that. But now I'm just bugged that we couldn't come up with a good answer.
I know.
All right.
Well,
we'll continue to work on it.
We will. Well, Shawn, who is next on the list?
Well, next up, we've got Demay.
All right. Well, Demay, welcome back. You've been with us on many of the questions after Nightfall. How are you?
I am well. I think I was counting on my fingers. I think I've participated in 5 of these.
That sounds about right. I would have thought 4 or 5. Yeah.
Yeah, I know I was in Rome one time and didn't have the tech to do it. And then another time my tech was being wacky, so I just bailed. So I think those are the only 2 I've missed.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. For those of our listeners, though, who have not listened to the other ones, who maybe have just joined us recently, tell us a little bit. You're from where?
I am from Fairbanks, Alaska. I am in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by beautiful trees, an open river, birds flying by, the occasional airplane droning overhead. And thankfully, the doggies are asleep, and there are no moose in the yard.
No moose.
And I bet it's still very sunny right now, isn't
We
it?
have almost 24 hours of sunlight already. We're that far north.
Wow, wonderful. In May. That's amazing.
Yeah, it is not dark here at all. But in the wintertime, even though the sun isn't up, we have the reflection of the stars off the snow. If I was an elf and had warm gear, I'd feel like I was in the Helcaraxa.
I was going to say Cuivianen, but Helcaraxa is probably more on point.
Well, the Bering Strait and the Helcaraxa do certainly seem to have a similar geographic function.
That's true.
Yeah, that is true. Well, I have been listening to, on my awesome commute, which is now about 4.5 minutes because I'm teaching now at my neighborhood school.
Okay, great.
I've been listening to the wonderful Rob Inglis recording of The Two Towers.
Yes.
And today I just finished The Two Towers, and this is a hard one for me to even think about because I was of the generation when the book came out. Frodo was alive, but captured by the enemy. I had to wait a really long time as a child to find out what happened because the book had not yet been published.
Right.
So today, as I was listening to the very, very last of the recording, an idea popped into my head. In the last chapter, Sam is wearing the ring. He thinks Frodo is dead. He's taken the ring. He's taken Sting. He has the elven light from Galadriel. Those are the things that he's taken to carry forth. But then he finds out that Frodo has been picked up by the orcs. And he says something about once he draws Sting, the orcs will see him. Why is that? What about the clothes he's wearing, and etc.? I mean, like he's wearing the ring,
Right.
So he's supposedly not visible to anyone because these troops of orcs have gone by him and no one's seen him. And basically he's in a rock canyon. There's no place to hide.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, once they've got my master and I'm not going to let them take him and defile him. So I'm going to take out Sting and I'm going to do battle here. And I'm going to be surrounded by a wall of dead orcs and maybe somebody will sing a song, but nobody will because they'll have the ring and
because they'll win.
Et cetera.
Right, exactly.
And what is up with this? Why is the sword visible? Why would the sword be visible?
Well, to me, that is a good question. I think we've touched on this a little bit, haven't we?
We have touched on this one as well.
Kind of go back to our notes on that.
It's been a while. I think it was back in the second season, episode 85.
Okay.
We were digging into the question of what items and weapons and articles of clothing and so on would be invisible when a ring bearer puts on the one ring. And what we concluded at that time was that the ring seems to confer invisibility to the wearer and anything that the wearer is wearing. So anything that's their clothes, of course, their clothes are invisible, and anything that's under their clothes, in their pockets, bags, and so forth would be invisible.
But once it's pulled out of a sheath or a pocket or anything like that.
Right. Weapons held in hands, as well as anything that gives off its own light. And I remember we were talking about the Elendil mirror. Right? Were not invisible, right? In fact, the Elendil mirror was visible on Isildur when he was invisible. So I think that's where the answer is. I think Sting being a weapon that's held in the hand, as well as giving off its own light, would be visible in Sam's hand. And I think we saw that in that episode. I think the reason we addressed that in episode 85 was because I think that was when we were in the Flies and Spiders chapter of the Hobbit.
Think so.
And I think there was a scene where Bilbo is actually fighting the spiders in Mirkwood, and I think it's mentioned that the sword is visible, even though he's invisible at the time. And those were with spiders, so the sword was not even giving off its own light at the time, because they were spiders, not orcs or anything. So the sword probably was not glowing blue.
No, that makes sense. You're right. In that chapter, we find that this is right after he sings the songs, right? He sings Old Fat Spider Spinning in a Tree, the Attercop one, and then the Lazy Lob Crazy Cob one.
Mm-hmm.
And then he says, with that he turned and found that the last space between two tall trees had been closed with a web. But luckily not a proper web, only great strands of double-thick spider rope run hastily backwards and forwards from trunk to trunk. Out came his little sword. He slashed the threads to pieces and went off singing. The spiders saw the sword, though I don't suppose they knew what it was, and at once the whole lot of them came hurrying after the Hobbit. This is, of course, after he had the ring on. So it does appear, like you said, that though it gives him invisibility in terms of the things on his body, the things he holds are different. That's an interesting distinction. Certainly one that you might argue doesn't make a ton of sense, but it's certainly how Tolkien created it.
Yeah.
And of course, anything that gives off its own light, like we talked about, which in this case, Sting isn't giving off light, but it's still held in his hand and still visible. So,
but then going back to Cirith Ungol and Sam, the sword would have been giving off its own light, as well as being in his hand. So there's two reasons that the orcs should.
And we see that there in that chapter. Sam came on, he drew the sword, a flicker of blue in his wavering hand, but they did not see it. And this was again while he's wearing the ring, which was able to give him that hearing. Where he could hear things that were further away and stuff like that.
So it's kind of hard to figure out the mechanics of it all, but that does seem to be the rule.
But we do know the rules, right?
Held, yeah.
For some reason, that's about the case. DeMay, that may not make a whole lot of sense to you, but that's the answer. What, are you good? Do you have a follow-up or anything?
Actually, it does make a lot of sense to me. The whole thing about what the wearer is wearing versus what the wearer is holding. However, I go back to the Elendil. I remember when I first read that, I thought, oh, that was odd. But that was a long time ago, and I haven't really thought much about it since then. So I guess I need to go back and reread that and think about it more, because a crown would be something you'd be wearing, not necessarily holding.
True, but it gives off its own light, and I think that's the difference. Because
that too is true.
Yeah, that's how we came up with that corollary to the rule.
So either you're holding it in your hand and or it gives off its own light.
That magical light. Okay. And talking about Sam again, holding the sword Sting, at one point, Sam does say that he drew the sword out and it gave him enough light to see where he was and what he was doing. And so, kind of like the guiding light. I am satisfied with this answer. For some reason, whenever you said the comment, what the wearer is wearing, then all of a sudden I just said, oh, okay, there you go. That makes sense.
I love the way you said you're satisfied with the answer. It made me think of, because of course we're dads and we have kids, made me think, Shawn, of the scene from Big Hero 6, and
are you satisfied with your answer?
Are you satisfied with your care?
Yeah.
So just to...
we cannot end the question and the answer until you say you are satisfied with your
satisfied with your care.
There's like 8 people out there who get that.
I know, seriously.
Actually, there's probably more. It's just the ones who have kids.
Exactly.
A couple of things in regards to characters wearing the ring but carrying things, and the things are visible. I'm thinking of in Return of the Shadow, there's the old draft of Farmer Maggot's house chapter.
Okay.
Where Frodo, who was Bingo at the time, he's lifting up the beer mug.
And the beer mug right. Actually, the beer mug's going by the window floating by itself in the air. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. I forgot about that.
There's more support from an early draft of, what the ring bearer is carrying is still visible, even if he's wearing the ring.
That's true.
And the other thing that I think of with the beer mug is it makes me think of Bilbo in Thranduil's halls.
Yes.
How funny it must have, did no elven guards ever see a plate of chicken floating down the hall?
Yeah, I know.
When Bilbo was stealing
maybe
food?
hid it under his jacket or something. Because once you hide it under your clothes, it is invisible again. That's what I was going to go to, was this line out of The Hunt for the Ring. This is right after the battle has gone badly. It's clear they're going to lose. And he says goodbye to his son. Isildur turned west, and drawing up the ring that hung in a wallet from a fine chain about his neck, he set it upon his finger with a cry of pain, and was never seen again by any eye upon Middle-earth. But the Elendilmere of the west could not be quenched, and suddenly it blazed forth red and wrathful as a burning star. So it's visible even though he's wearing the ring. But then we get this. Men and orcs gave way in fear, and Isildur, drawing a hood over his head, vanished into the night.
Oh.
So
that's right. I remember us talking about that back then.
And then, of course, he loses the ring in the river, gets to the other side, and the Elendilmere makes a great target at that point.
That's right.
And in fact, we get a footnote from Christopher Tolkien on that particular thing. And he says, the meaning sufficiently remarkable of this passage appears to be that the light of the Elendilmere was proof against the invisibility conferred by the One Ring when worn, if its light would be visible were the ring not worn. But when Isildur covered his head with a hood, its light was extinguished.
There you go.
Pretty much confirmed exactly what we said, that if it gives off its own light, it's visible. But if you're covering up with your clothes, it becomes invisible again.
Yeah. And so Bilbo could have just hidden some roast chicken underneath his cloak or whatever and then got off.
Yeah, exactly.
And it would have been invisible. Of course, after hiding roast chicken under your sweaty travel-stained cloak, it's probably inedible, too.
Who wants to eat that, right?
But, I guess if you're starving.
I guess that's true. Who knows where he put that chicken? I mean, remember the terrible line in the film when Keeley says, guess what's in my trousers or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Awful, awful line. Roast chicken, really. I mean,
there you go.
You're just hungry.
There you go.
That may be the last time we'll ever reference that particular scene in the film, just to be real clear.
Oh, well, now that door is open, we'll find all kinds of ways to bring it up.
Maybe.
No, we won't.
Maybe. I doubt it. All right. Who is next up, Shawn? Oh, actually, before we move on, Arthur had his hand raised there real quick. I didn't see it. Arthur, what do you got?
Just a quick thought on this topic, putting aside the fact that the ring may or may not conceal scent of chicken.
I'm sure it doesn't, no.
First of all, Sam knew that the orcs would be able to see him and his sword, see the sword, but this is an elvish sword, and the light it gives off is specifically tied to the presence of orcs.
True.
And I had been wondering if that connects to this.
If that connects to the invisibility issue?
Specifically the fact that he knew the orcs would be able to see him, and he's carrying a sword that goes into strobe mode when there's orcs around.
Right. Well, I mean, certainly you imagine Frodo would have seen that in action somehow, or heard about it in action.
Yeah, I mean, certainly it wouldn't have helped that orcs were around and that it was going into strobe mode, as it were. But it seems like even if it hadn't been giving off its own light at that point, the sword probably would have still been visible.
Yeah, even without its light, as we just learned with Sting being pulled out by Bilbo in the forest with the spiders and it not glowing, it just being visible.
Yeah.
Well, next up, we have Rob. Rob, thank you for joining us tonight. How are you?
Hey guys, I'm doing great. Glad to finally be able to join you.
Yeah, we're able to have you, Rob. We're really thrilled to have you join us. First time on the show.
Yes.
So where are you from?
Yeah, my name is Rob. I'm from Opelika, Alabama, down in the deep south.
All right.
Wow.
Yeah, the deep south.
Yeah.
And my question, it's more of an opinion question.
Okay.
Is so you guys can't be wrong.
We love that. Wow, Rob, thank you.
You're welcome. I try to be nice.
We can still try to be wrong, have the wrong opinions.
Trust me on that one.
So I've been thinking a lot about Tom Bombadil, and I've noticed some similarities between him and Treebeard, and sort of, I want to say the entishness of Tom, but I think it would be more appropriate to say the Bombadiliciousness of Treebeard.
If nothing else, I just like the word Bombadiliciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? It sounds kind of delicious.
It does. That's exactly, There's a... I like that.
I may be really young, but I'm right there with y'all on the dad jokes.
There you go.
Excellent.
So a couple of the similarities that I notice is, one, when Gandalf both calls Tom eldest, but then also says that Treebeard is, the oldest living thing to walk this Middle Earth.
Right.
That's a similarity, commenting on their age. And then the control that they have over trees, I know that's a really obvious similarity between the two. But then just some sort of the like distance that they both try to keep from the conflicts of the world.
Yeah.
Sort of holding to and identifying really with, and the language that they use to really identify with their places. And I just kind of wanted to know if y'all thought there was, because I think that's pretty significant.
Oh yeah.
And I can say why at the end, but I just wanted to know if y'all thought there was any sort of significance to that, if y'all had thought about that before. Just want to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah. Okay. That's a really good insight. And Shawn, I can't say that I have thought about the similarities, though I have at least noted them. I've you can't help but note that they're both old. They're both live in forests.
They're both extremely ancient. They're both called eldest, and we've talked about, how we've talked about reconciling the fact that they both are apparently eldest. And we've come up with, I think, a pretty good answer on how they can both be eldest. One is the eldest living thing, and the other is the eldest something else.
Right. Yeah. Tom is something. He's a category of one.
Right.
As we talked about.
And I think, that's a really good point, that they both are very in tune with nature. They both tend to speak in poetry.
That was the next thing I thought of. Yeah.
And they both kind of have this sort of jovial demeanor, very, very friendly with the hobbits in a very casual kind of way. They're just very...
And a real strong identification with place.
Yeah.
I think really comes out for both of them. A deep power and a deep wisdom. Though I have to say some of those characteristics, like I think possibly the jovialness, the wisdom, the isolation from trouble, that those may come from age. In other words, those may be, rather than similarities between the two of them, those may be similarities that you would have with any entity that was that old.
I think you're exactly right. And I think that's probably where I'd find the significance in it, because I don't think that they're necessarily the same kind of spirit. I think we've talked Tom to death.
I think we've talked about that. Boy, you're not kidding. Poor Tom. He's been beaten up a lot here. Yeah.
Yeah, he has. Almost as much as he beat that Barrow White. But I still think they're different kinds of spirits.
Barrow White. Barrow.
Thank you. I could hear that Barrow White voice anytime. But no, I still think they're different kinds of spirits. But I do think you're probably right that with all that age comes wisdom and sort of a cavalier attitude towards the world, and this connection with nature, or maybe connection with nature is another cause of that joviality.
Yeah, could be.
I think that they have very similar experience, even though I would say that I still think they're two different spirits in nature, but maybe similar experience. And maybe Tolkien is trying to draw a connection between these two characters as both being very in tune with nature and very tied to a place.
As an indication of their wisdom. Yeah, I think so. I think that would not surprise me in the least, to see him indicate their close ties with nature being a direct result of the wisdom they've gained from being around so long. Well, Rob, you said you had a theory perhaps that would connect those, and I doubt we hit it because we were just talking about our own thoughts, but what do you see as the significance of that?
Yeah, not necessarily. Well, it's kind of a theory. I think that he creates and wants to write in some of his beliefs and opinions about that he has like Eru Iluvatar as the highest like ruling being, and then all of his children are supposed to be sort of like sub creators and sub rulers over different aspects, and you see that with the Valar. And so I think you see that most clearly associating with location with Tom and with Treebeard. But then you see it in their authority more clearly and explicitly. And so I think that you're sort of looking at, although they're two different spirits, with his love of nature, you're sort of looking at Tolkien's view on sort of like the pinnacle and what the ideal sub-creator, sub-ruler looks like. And it, in some ways, I think that speaks a little bit to his anti-industrial feelings as well, but not necessarily as explicitly. I think it's just a really cool way to look at his opinion on like stewardship of the world, stewardship of the authority that Eru gives to his children and his creation.
I think that's a great insight. And I think both of them are really strong examples of, what Tolkien's ideal about the way that we should, I like your phrase, be stewards of nature. The way that we should do that. Yeah.
Whatever our area is that we've been made responsible for, in their case, Fangorn and the Old Forest, and even to some extent the Barrow Downs, being responsible stewards of that. Yeah. That does not surprise me in the least. That would be something I could see Tolkien being rather purposeful with.
And maybe he would say that happiness, that joviality that we see in these characters, maybe that
comes as a result
of the fact that they are in harmony with their place, with their nature, with nature around them. They maybe, because they're so in harmony with nature, they're in harmony with Arda, and maybe they're more in harmony with the music. And that makes them happier. They're not at odds with the world around them the way the children of Iluvatar so frequently are.
Yeah, that's true.
So I don't know. That's really interesting.
All right, Shawn. Well, who's next?
Next up, we've got Mark.
All right, Mark. Good evening. How are you?
I am excellent. I'm dialed in here from Barksdale Air Force Base in Shreveport, Louisiana.
All right.
My home state. Good to have you here.
That's right. Yeah.
Glad to be here. So coming back to Bombadil, I don't recall Frodo ever having put on the ring before the moment that he puts on the ring and goes to sneak off out the door during the session over at Bombadil's place. And it occurred to me that his attitude seems very casual about it. Like maybe he did try it out once in the past and just not written about, unless I missed something. What do you guys think?
So this is a really good question that we actually had a chance to address in an episode that we recorded that hasn't been released yet. And actually, by the time this releases, it will have been released, won't it, Alan? Because I think it was in episode 127.
27? I was going to say either 126 or 127. I couldn't remember.
127. I've got it right here. And we speculated that he did probably try it on once or twice when he was in the Shire, maybe many more times during the years that he had it after Bilbo left, but before he knew what it was. There's a couple of clues to the fact that he probably did do exactly that. And I don't know. Do we want to kind of dive into some of those here, Alan? It's been a few episodes.
I mean, it's kind of previewing an episode that we've already touched on that answer, but I think the question has been asked and we must do our job. So
yes, absolutely.
Do you happen to have those references handy? Because I don't.
I do. Yeah. So
good.
There's a couple of hints in the book that suggest Frodo did use the ring at some point. And the first of those is in Book 1, Chapter 10. This is the Strider chapter. Gandalf, in his letter to Frodo, in one of the postscripts, he says, do not use it again, not for any reason whatsoever, or not for any reason whatever.
Right.
He says, do not use it again. Again. In Book 2, Chapter 7, Galadriel says to Frodo, and this is the Mirror of Galadriel chapter that we'll get to next season.
Right.
Galadriel says to Frodo, only thrice have you set the ring upon your finger since you knew what you possessed.
Right.
So that implies that he put the ring on his finger other times before he knew what he possessed.
Right. Not only thrice have you put it on your finger, it's Only thrice have you put it on your finger since you knew what it was.
Right.
Yeah.
And we know what 3 times Galadriel's speaking of. She's speaking of Tom Bombadil's house, at the Prancing Pony, and then at Weathertop.
Weathertop.
So those are the 3 times Frodo used it since he knew what he possessed, meaning since Gandalf came back to him in the Shadow of the Past chapter and told him what it was. Yeah, given the wording of Gandalf's caution not to use it again, and Galadriel's seeing through the fact that he's used it only 3 times since he knew what it was, yeah, that does imply that he probably did use it during the 17 years between Bilbo's going away and Frodo's going away.
Exactly.
And actually, we went back and parsed chapter 1 of The Lord of the Rings, and we found several places where it looks like Frodo had every intention of using the ring back when he just thought it was a handy-dandy invisibility ring. So, yeah, I think he did use the ring probably pretty nonchalantly when he was in the Shire. Probably
without much
every time Lobelia came by, I'm willing to bet.
That would be a good reason.
But yeah, I mean, and I think all that makes sense because before he knew what the ring was, he had no reason not to use it, right?
No,
it was just Bilbo's invisibility ring. He knew Bilbo used it all the time in his adventures. He knew it was a very useful thing to have. In fact, that's one word that Frodo uses.
Yeah.
He says the ring may be useful when he finds out that he's inherited it. Gandalf does say, you know, you probably shouldn't use that, but he doesn't say don't use that because it's Sauron's. You know, it's They just they don't know. They don't have all the information yet.
That's correct. Well, there's one other question down. Shawn, who's coming up now?
Okay, well, next up, we've got Carolyn.
Well, hi, Carolyn. Welcome back. How are you tonight?
I am well. It's nice to be back with you guys.
Good to have you back.
Always great to have you here.
Thanks. I am also in Shreveport, Louisiana, with my husband, Mark.
Oh, okay.
My question today, I've got just a very short reading. This is from the Fog on the Barrow Downs.
Okay.
And this is after they've been rescued by Tom. Tom says, "You found yourselves again out of deep water. Clothes are but little loss if you escape from drowning."
Yeah.
And then going forward into the Strider chapter, this is after Mary comes running back in from the outside.
Yeah, I think I know where you're going.
And Nob says, he seemed to be asleep. "I thought I had fallen into deep water," he says to me when I shook him. And just skipping a little bit, Mary says, "I can't remember. I had an ugly dream. I went to pieces. I don't know what came over me." And Strider says, "I do. It's the black breath."
Right.
So first of all, I just thought that imagery about the deep water and the drowning were very interesting. But can you tell me, what is the black breath?
Ooh.
And I apologize if you've maybe talked about this on an episode that I haven't heard yet.
That's true. I mean, it does happen where people ask us questions about things that we have talked about but not released yet, and that's just the way a show has to go. But we'll do our best. So thank you. That's a great question, Carolyn. Shawn, let's start taking a look and see what we can find.
We did actually talk about the black breath in episode 126, which has not released
Second
yet.
half of that chapter, right?
Yeah.
Strider 2. So that'll be out on the 26th. Yeah. So that will have come out quite a bit before this. That'll have come out almost a month before this episode airs.
Yeah.
So about 4 weeks ago, we talked about, not that you would know, but you know, yeah. Where do we want to go with this one, Shawn? I mean, obviously there's that bit about the imagery that we didn't touch on really, and that's the deep water. I don't think I tied that.
No, I don't.
I
never drew that connection before. And that is really fascinating.
It is, because I'd only looked at Tom's comment as more of an analogy, saying your clothes don't matter if you've escaped from drowning. But now I think he's really talking about some sort of a imagery that is more than an analogy. It may have been something that's the experience that they had drowning in that way.
Yeah. You know, we talked about the fact that maybe when they were in the barrows that there was a sort of almost a kind of crossing over into not quite the Wraith world, but maybe a white world, a barrow whitish place.
Dead,
yeah,
right.
And maybe that's what he's talking about there. Maybe that's underscoring the fact that they actually were in this other world briefly.
Why? That is a good catch about the water symbolism. Definitely.
I never made that connection before.
No. As for the black breath, though, boy, that's going to be interesting. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I don't know that we've ever really come up with a specific. I don't know what the word is.
a diagnosis
of what the black breath is. Thank you.
Well, you have the black breath, so we're going to put you on this particular antibiotic. It's got some strong side effects, though. You're going to want to.
It's Athlos. It's the good stuff.
Right, it is. It is the good
natural
stuff.
Remedies,
Of course.
But no, I mean, we do get a little bit of a description of it much later on in the Houses of Healing chapter from The Return of the King, and I've actually got that here. I can pull it up.
Good. I'm glad you pulled that up.
Because there's, basically what happens is when Merry and Éowyn are attacked by the Witch King later on, they both succumb to the Black Breath. Faramir succumbs to the Black Breath. And they all go back to the Houses of Healing, and the healers there have no idea what's going on. None of them can treat it.
No.
And it even says, "But now their art and knowledge were baffled, for there were many sick of a malady that would not be healed, and they called it the Black Shadow, for it came from the Nazgul. And those who were stricken with it fell slowly into an ever deeper dream, and then passed to silence and a deadly cold, and so died. And it seemed to the tenders of the sick that on the halfling and on the Lady of Rohan this malady lay heavily." Now, the phrase used there is Black Shadow, but Aragorn does come right along in just a couple of pages, and he calls it alternately the Black Shadow or the Black Breath, so they are the same thing. But what exactly that is, I mean, I think it's just maybe it's just a sickness that comes from, contact with the ring wraiths.
Some sort of a despair that
there
comes
is that.
As almost a viral level of despair. You can't fight it. It's not something that you have, the ability to say, "Oh, I'm going to feel hope nonetheless." No, you can't. This is an overwhelming, physiologically caused despair.
Yeah. Yeah. And we talked in that episode 126, we actually see a little bit from Merry's point of view when he is sick with it and he's walking back into Minas Tirith, and the language is so full of despair.
Oh, isn't it? Yeah.
A meaningless journey in a hateful dream, going on and on to some dim ending that memory cannot seize. He's just sort of plodding along, going back to Minas Tirith, and this, I think, like you said, Alan, it's this despair that is just, he's just plagued by it. Plagued.
And that's the weapon, plagued. Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, it's
little known fact, the Black Breath was actually transmitted by rats. No.
Yep.
Yeah. That's the chief weapon of the Nazgul. Well, and surprise, don't forget surprise. The chief weapon of the Nazgul is this fear, and fear and despair really kind of go hand in hand. I mean, really, despair is nothing but succumbing to fear and allowing that to make your decisions for you. I mean, you only despair.
It's allowing your fear to blot out all other options, isn't it?
There you go. That's a great way of putting it. Yeah.
Even a broken clock.
Blind squirrel finds a nut. Yeah.
I mean, we've talked about this before. The despair is basically just saying, I know that there's no way out of this, and I'm just throwing up my hands. I'm giving up. I'm despairing.
Right.
But nobody really knows. Even the wise cannot see all ends. Is that just from the movies?
Even the wise cannot see all ends. Yeah. Even Gandalf doesn't know.
Right.
And if Gandalf doesn't know, you don't know.
Right.
So there's no reason.
So
to
you
give
shouldn't
up hope.
Despair. Yeah.
But in this case, they literally cannot help themselves. There's a malady here that is beyond a state of mind. It's beyond a choice. It's beyond their ability to snap themselves out of it, so to speak. This is something that requires external healing. All right, Carolyn. Well, thank you so much for your patience. I hope that we were able to answer it to some level of satisfaction.
Yes, it was really good. Are you guys familiar with the Brian Sibley BBC sort of play?
I'm familiar with it. Yeah, the radio drama. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So right around that, in this part of the story, they change up the wording a little bit, and Merry says, "I don't know what happened. I fell over." And Strider then says it was the Black Breath. And a few months ago, I had twisted my ankle, and people were always asking me, what happened? What happened? After a while, it's like, I fell over. It was the Black Breath. It was a much easier thing to say, but nobody understood me.
It's
right.
That's just the life of a nerd, isn't it?
Time. Yeah,
all the time. Yeah.
Oh man, all those inside references, and people just look at you like, what?
Sometimes that answer is much more exciting than the truth.
Yeah, that is true.
I told my wife that I was a half elf for about a year and a half when we first started dating.
Are you kidding me? Really? That is
wasn't
hilarious.
that long. It might have been a couple of months. I joked about it a few times.
And she still dated you. That's impressive.
I know, right? It's amazing.
My respect for her has gone up significantly.
I know.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Oh, man.
It was the one time she turned it around on me that I was like, okay, this woman, I'm going to marry this woman. Because
there you go.
I was saying something and she said, yeah, because you're a half elf, right? I'm like, yes. And then I never said it again.
Will you marry me? That's right. Oh goodness. Man. That's great. Well, Shawn, who happens to be up next for us tonight?
Okay. Well, next up, we have got Scotch.
All right. Welcome, sir. How are you tonight?
Scotch from Boston. It's going to snow tomorrow. Ready for that.
Wow.
So,
wow.
Yeah, in
May. May, yeah.
And I'm taking notes here. I'm loving Bombadaliciousness.
Yes.
And the hidden underpants, the Randall fried chicken. It's good stuff. That's what I've got to take.
That is absolute great stuff right there. There's our blurb right there, Shawn.
And the Barry White. Very good.
Oh, you never go wrong with Barry White, baby.
The Barry White never totally goes away. You never know when he's going to come back.
Never
He'll sneak up on you.
Don't take this wrong, but I sometimes fall asleep to your show. And the Barrow White, I don't know which one of you guys did the Barrow White voice. Woke me up in terror.
The actual Barrow White, yeah.
I don't know which one it was.
I think I did it the first time, and Shawn, you got it the next, right?
Yeah.
Terrifying.
That was awesome. Fun. That was fun.
We fall asleep during our show, if that helps, while we're recording it.
It's I first started. Let me just throw this out here. I used to fall asleep to the Rob Inglis.
Oh yeah.
The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Just I'd throw it on, and just like very soothing. You can fall asleep.
Oh yeah.
It's a slow story.
Yeah.
We all love it. But then when Gollum would come in, again, just the raspy voice, just like you wake up in terror.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
That's probably the chapter where you decide I'm not going to fall asleep to this tonight.
Yeah, you can't fall Fellowship of the Ring, you can fall asleep, no problem.
There you go.
But then
once you get into Two Towers, nope.
Yeah.
2 Towers, yeah. Shelob and 2 Towers. So I got a whole list of questions here, and the Ring has been the theme of the night, as is usual.
Yeah.
I forget where I read this, but were the original Rings of Power originally meant for only the elves from Celebrimbor? Because it explains a lot why things didn't work out so well when Sauron gave the rings to the men and to the dwarves.
So we're talking about those 16 rings, right? Because we know that the 3 were never meant for anybody but the elves, and of course Sauron never meant the 1 to be for anybody but himself. So the 7 and the 9, were they intended from the beginning for men and dwarves, or were they intended for the elves? All right.
Exactly, and like I say, I forget where I read it, but I feel like that they were not intended originally from Sauron for the men and the dwarves. Tolkien doesn't hammer that point home anywhere in the story, but it explains a lot why things don't go so well when the amateur hour, the ringwraiths go looking for the hobbits.
Right.
And the dwarves, that doesn't work out so well either.
No.
So.
Okay. Well, that's a good question.
Yeah, I wonder what you think about that.
All right.
That is a great question, Scotch. Thank you. And a partial answer, this might go back to season 1, Alan. I know we have talked about, or maybe not. Maybe it's the beginning of season 3, but I know we have determined that the 7 and the 9 were not intended for dwarves and men specifically.
That's correct.
And it says in Otrapata of the Rings of Power in the Third Age, and at the end of the Silmarillion, it's talking about Sauron, and it says 7 rings he gave to the dwarves, but to men he gave 9, for men proved in this matter, as in others, the readiest to his will.
Right.
So while it doesn't say it directly, it's very clear that the reason men got so many is because Sauron felt like if he gave more to them, they would be more swayed to his will. So that right there tells us that was all Sauron's doing. That was an ad hoc decision. They were not designed for the dwarves and the men specifically. Were they meant for elves though?
I'm trying to find
that I don't know.
Bit on about their manufacture, so to speak. I'm trying to find out a little bit more. I'm looking in the history of Galadriel and Celeborn to find the section
that would be where I'd look, yeah.
Yeah.
Because they're generally just referred to as elven. I'm looking at Otrapata still. The elves made many rings. Secretly, Sauron made 1 ring to rule all the others. So even those 16 were made by the elves just with Sauron's help.
That's correct. In fact, we learn that here. Sauron himself departed from Eregion about the year 1500 after the Myrdain had begun the making of the Rings of Power. Now, Celebrimbor was not corrupted in heart or faith, but had accepted Sauron as what he posed to be, and when at length he discovered the existence of the One Ring, he revolted against Sauron and went to Loranand to take counsel once more with Galadriel. They should have destroyed all the rings of power at this time, but they failed to find the strength. Galadriel counseled him that the 3 rings of the elves, so they are labeled as the 3 rings of the elves, should be hidden, never used, and dispersed. So they do seem to be set aside separately.
But is that narrated from hindsight, or is that
right? That's the question.
They knew at the time.
That's exactly right. Because then we get, when Sauron captures them and they become the 9 and the 7, here's what we get. The attackers broke into Eregion with ruin and devastation and captured the chief object of Sauron's assault, the House of the Myrdain, where were their smithies and their treasures. Celebrimbor, desperate, himself withstood Sauron on the steps of the great door of the Myrdain, but he was grappled and taken captive, and the house was ransacked.
Are you going to read the part that makes me sad again?
No, about him becoming a pincushion? No, I'm not going to get that far.
But you said it. Thanks.
But I said it. I don't say it. I'm not going to read it. I don't think Tolkien uses the word pincushion. He's got a lot more tact than I do. The text continues that Sauron took the 9 rings and other lesser works of the Myrdain, but the 7 and the 3 he could not find. Then they tortured Celebrimbor, learned where the 7 were, and he revealed that because he didn't value the 7 and the 9 as much as he valued the 3. Those 16 were made with Sauron's aid. The 3 were made by Celebrimbor alone with a different power and purpose. So it does seem like they were, I don't know, maybe not made specifically for those groups of persons, but they were not as valuable as those 3. That's for certain.
Yeah. I tend to think that my takeaway from what you just read and what I just read is that the 16 were all of a similar kind.
Right.
It was not that, and we know that the effects that they had on dwarves versus the effects they had on men had everything to do with dwarves and men. They had nothing to do with the rings themselves.
The rings themselves, that's
Remember
correct.
that the only reason the dwarves didn't turn into wraiths was because they were just hardier.
Right. Well, because they're not like men. They're
right.
made of different stuff, so to speak.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that the rings were different.
No.
It was that the recipients were different. And so I think the 16 are probably all of a similar kind. It was Sauron who chose to divide them up 7 and 9 the way he did. Although it kind of sounds like
maybe
I don't know
about that. That
separated.
Sounds like like they'd been separated. But to what purpose? Right? Maybe they were made in batches. We made a batch of 7, then we made a batch of 9.
That could be.
That's the only thing I can think of.
And you also have to be so careful with that. I mean,
how much of it's hindsight? Yeah,
right. And we always turn to that section of the Unfinished Tales, but in some ways that is the most problematic in terms of
it is. It
canonicity
is,
and consistency with the rest of the story. But
you are right.
I'm not saying reject it. I'm just I'm wondering. But
it's the only place we have, though.
Right. I tend to think that the 7 and the 9 were not divvied up ahead of time. Were they intended to be given freely to other races of Middle Earth, or were they all intended for the elves? I tend to think they probably were just intended for the elves' use, but there's nothing to prove that one way or the other.
No, but they were definitely lesser than the 3.
Yeah.
Arthur, I saw you had your hand up. You might have some insight on this. What do you have for us?
Well, actually, you guys basically said a lot of what I was thinking, which is the first 16, which was a product of Sauron in collaboration. So they were all tainted, but they were all similar, and the difference is not in them; it's who they were given to.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And the other 3, which were separate, but it also strikes me there's an interesting parallel. Celebrimbor made 3 rings that nobody else knew about and gave them to the elves. Sauron made 1 ring that nobody else knew about and kept it for himself. Right. So that's kind of something that just occurred to me as an interesting
parallel between Celebrimbor and Sauron.
Was a Sauron protege.
Right.
Yeah.
I presume that others in the Myrdain would know that Celebrimbor was making those 3, but certainly Sauron was unaware of them, at least at the time. And then certainly nobody but Sauron knew about the 1. Boy, that's a fascinating little catch. All right. Do you think we answered that to your satisfaction? You have a little follow-up for us or anything?
I like it. I think that just a quick follow-up is that Tolkien really never hammered that point home, and sort of explains why Sauron was kind of hampered by he had to deal with kind of like, okay, I got to give the rings to men. They're not the greatest, obviously.
They're better than the dwarves, though. At least I can get control of them.
The dwarves, but it's just like Sauron's like, oh, I got to send the men, I guess, like do the best they can, and obviously they had some problems.
I think Morgoth found this too. They make good slaves, and so they may not be.
They do.
They may not be the wisest or the strongest, but maybe that's why
they do. But they're
working with.
They're like middle managers, and like you send them out there, and they're just like, oh, we're going on this terrible camping trip, and just like Oh, now we got Strider. Where do they get these barrel blades? What? You know.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it was a tough call, but people are expecting them to be like these mighty warriors or whatnot. But
And they're more like the Keystone Cops.
Exactly. Man, you called it. That's exactly what I was saying. That's exactly it. But Tolkien, man. He just never he makes that obvious. So
yeah.
Kind of
and he does that a lot with things, doesn't he? Right? I mean,
he really
very few things are. The minimum amount of things is spelled out, and the rest is left to our imagination and speculation. And I love that. That's one of the things that makes the show possible, number one, but it also makes it entertaining.
Thank you, Professor, for leaving lots of stones unturned for us to turn over.
Yeah, we appreciate it very much.
I think his training as a medievalist helped with that. I mean, he spent his entire life working with these medieval texts where, as we learned from folks like Michael Drought and Corey Olson, there's you don't always get everything when you're looking at a text like Beowulf. There are these textual ruins, and I think he wanted his story to have some of those in them as well. They do make the world feel bigger.
Is this where I get to say "ailed enter your work"?
Sure.
Just because, that comes up sometimes.
I bring it up as often as I can.
I usually let you say it, but I had to try
you do.
just once. Anyway.
But, I don't know. We made fun of prequels a little earlier in this episode. And
yes, we did.
Yeah, I always feel like when filmmakers or even, book writers come back and they write prequels and they start explaining stuff that wasn't explained before, I don't know. It always makes the world feel smaller to me.
It does.
And part of the expansiveness of Tolkien's world is these textual ruins, these things that are not quite spelled out for us.
Yeah, I agree totally. I think it's what makes a world. You can make a world feel wide, miles wide, but you have to make it feel deep to do it justice. And that's what Tolkien does, is these stories feel deep.
Yeah.
And other mythologies, other fictional universes are indeed a mile wide with 1,000 different races and planets and languages, but they all feel very, very shallow. And it's like just a big puddle. It looks like it's deep, but you're never going to get past the soles of your shoes. So
yeah, well said. I mean, I think they feel popped out of somebody's head right there on the spot, whereas Tolkien's world feels lived in. It feels like it's been around for a long time.
Feels absolutely real. Yeah. All right. Well, that was a fun question to talk about, mostly because I think we could actually talk about it and sound like we knew what we were talking about.
Every once in a while.
So, Shawn, who's up next?
Next up, we have got Lee.
All right. Well, Lee, welcome back to the show. How are you tonight?
Good, guys. Thank you very much. Here in Oregon, it's not snowing for May, for a change.
Good.
But my question tonight is more on the ring rates, going back to that. And I noticed from looking at the appendices, in 3441 of the Second Age, they go into the shadows when Sauron fades. And then in the Third Age, they, circa 1300, they reappear. And then Sauron, even as the necromancer or Dol Guldur, isn't mentioned until 2060 as the power of Dol Guldur grows. Wise fear it may be Sauron taking shape again, which is 10 years after the Witch King challenges Eärnur and Mardul becomes the steward. My question is, because they come back sooner than Sauron did, and this is getting real metaphysical and big into maybe it's because they're human and gift and not a Maiar and all that stuff. But is there anything in any of history of Middle Earth or anywhere that can explain why that is? Because if they don't have their rings on them and they're less powerful, how can they come back before Sauron comes back? Because they're around for like a few hundred years, all of the Arnor stuff happens. And it just confused me. And maybe that's just the way it's going to be.
That's a good question.
That is a good question. And the first thing that I'm wondering is, I know that by the time of the War of the Ring, the Wraiths don't have their rings anymore. But did they have their rings, in the first
Did
part
they still
of the Third
have their
Age?
rings early enough to give them the power to appear and interact?
To come back.
Before Sauron regained his form.
Yeah, for some reason, I've gotten in trouble with ring wraiths wearing their own rings before. So I am totally uncertain of this now, but I have it in my head that they had their rings until recently, at the time of the War of the Ring. Sauron had recently gathered those 9 rings back to himself.
And I don't know that there's anything that gives us the timeline, but it's certainly a valuable speculation.
Yeah.
It's possible.
I guess I've always assumed that they had their rings, when the Witch King was doing the Angmar thing and he had all this power, he must have had his ring because who else was holding it at the time? Sauron wasn't around. But I don't know that that's stated anywhere, and I think it might just be my own assumption. And we know how good my assumptions are when it comes to rates and rings. So I'm not sure about whether they had their rings or not. But I mean, I guess I would say because they have less power than Sauron, maybe that's why they're able to sort of recharge faster. The battery that's being recharged, so to speak, is a smaller one, and so they're able to recharge quicker. And remember that Sauron has been destroyed a few times by now, right? He was destroyed in
That's true.
In the fall of Numenor, and then he was destroyed again.
Oh no, not again.
The Bowl of Petunias.
Right.
But yeah, he was overthrown.
It was a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy reference, folks, just in case you missed it. The improbability drive kicked in and multiple things happened.
Turned
one
a couple
of which was
of nuclear missiles into a whale and a bowl of petunias.
Right. And the bowl of petunias thought, not again. And that was like the mystery of, Anyway, I just want to make sure people understood the context of that. So you're right. We don't really know, but I like the theory that they don't require as much recharging, if you will, to come back. Their charge is smaller. They don't have as much power. And if they are still in possession of their rings, that would make sense. Well, we might have an answer in letter 246. We touched on this actually in a recent episode when we were correcting your thing about the Nazgul and their rings.
I deserve that.
It was a theory of, what would happen if Frodo put the ring on? Would they be able to do anything? And he says, their errand, which was laid upon them by Sauron, who still through their 9 rings, which he held, had primary control of their wills. Problem is, we don't know how long he held them. It doesn't say when he held them, when he took them from the 9.
Right.
So we don't know there. Yeah, I think the only thing we can go on is that it doesn't take as much for them to come back as it does for him to come back. Let's look at that timeline again. Shawn, what were the years that he mentioned? We've got 1980, the Witch King comes to Mordor and gathers the Nazgul.
3441 of the Second Age is when the ring wraiths go into the shadows. And then it was 1300 when the Nazgul reappear. The chief of these comes north to Angmar.
Right.
And then...
But 200 years before that, the wise discovered, as in 1100, that an evil power has made a stronghold at Dol Guldur. It is thought to be one of the Nazgul. It may not be.
Good catch.
That could be Sauron himself, in which case Sauron has come back before the Nazgul.
That's a good catch.
It could go either way on that.
That is a very good catch. It could have actually been Sauron.
As it would eventually become, of course. Dol Guldur, the sorcerer, would end up being Sauron himself. So that was 1100. 2060, almost 1,000 years later, the power of Dol Guldur grows. The wise fear it may be Sauron taking shape again. And then 3 years later, Gandalf goes there. Sauron retreats and hides in the east. So yeah, indeed, if that moment in 1100 is not Sauron, but is the Witch King, then the Nazgul, or at least the Witch King, has been back for a significantly long period of time, nearly 1,000 years, prior to Sauron retreating and hiding in the east. But if we go on the idea that the thought to be one of the Nazgul is an incorrect thought, as it might be, then indeed Sauron himself might have come back as early as 1100.
Yeah. It does say, I'm looking at the Silmarillion now, and this is in Otrapata as well. It says that this is the first rising of the shadow in Mirkwood.
Right.
And it says, for though many deemed that it was wrought by the ring wraiths, he, and this is Gandalf, or Mithrandir as he's called here, he feared that it was indeed the first shadow of Sauron returning.
Right.
And he went to Dol Guldur, and the sorcerer fled from him, and there was a watchful peace for a long while. So,
well, of course, that would have been the moment of 2063 when he went to Dol Guldur. Sauron retreats and hides in the east. That's when the watchful peace begins.
Is that 2063? It doesn't. Okay, it doesn't have the dates
in the timeline in the Appendix B, the Tale of Years. That's what we get.
So that's not quite this early.
No. So that's referencing the Third Age, not 1100, and that makes sense because I don't think Gandalf would be really all that involved yet, because I don't think at 1100, I don't even know, when did the Astari get sent over?
They were there because they were among the ones who discovered that. Yeah, I think they came over around 1000.
That's what I would have thought too. That's not actually in the Tale of Years. That's going to be in Unfinished Tales. So let's piece these timelines together. So under the Astari, we get that they first appeared in Middle-earth about the year 1000 of the Third Age. So they showed up about 100 years before they would then discover
the Shadow, Rose, and Mirkwood.
Right. Because as the Tale of Years tells us, the Wise, which is listed here as the Astari and the Chief Eldar.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So they were there, discovered that an evil power has made the stronghold of Dol Guldur, thought to be one of the Nazgul, but of course, that may in fact have been an incorrect thought, therefore that's Sauron.
Even later on, it seems that most of the Wise still thought it was one of the Ringwraiths, and Gandalf actually realized that it was Sauron. That's that 2063 you were talking about. Now,
right.
That's 1,000
so almost
years
1,000
later.
years later. Uh-huh.
But still, it's quite possible that the Wise were fooled even that early. And maybe it was Sauron all along.
It makes sense, because certainly the shadow that had fallen on Greenwood the Great, that was 1,000 years into the Third Age. We get that in the chapter on the Astari. It says that in The Lord of the Rings, the only general statement about the Astari is found in the headnote to the Tale of Years. So it's oddly enough in the Unfinished Tales, but it's referencing something that's in Appendix B, saying that when maybe 1,000 years had passed and the first shadow had fallen on Greenwood the Great, the Astari, or wizards, appeared in Middle-earth.
Oh, yeah, there it is. It does say it there.
There it is. So I'm going to land, I'm just going to take a bold statement here, and I'm going to say that indeed the circa 1100 entry that says that it's thought to be one of the Nazgul is in fact actually Sauron, having come back already 1,100 years after his destruction at the end of the Second Age.
I'm willing to agree with that it probably was actually Sauron, and Sauron was back a lot sooner than anybody realized.
Yeah.
And if that is not the case, if somebody wants to take into their headcanon that that's not the case, then I think we'd have to go with something like the smaller battery theory on why the Ringwraiths,
which I like too, but I think this gives us even more leeway.
I agree.
Say Sauron. Yeah.
Yep, I agree.
Excellent. All right. Well, Lee, does that answer your question to your satisfaction?
Yes, and I totally skipped that. I mean, this is the section of the book that's always brought me into the world. So I've read it so much I skip things. But I like that as well. And I a second thing for a different conversation for different days. I think it's funny that they expected the Ringwraiths to come back before Sauron. There's something there, but for another day.
Yeah, like why they even thought that the Ringwraiths could have come back before Sauron. That's an interesting question.
That is a good question.
Maybe they really thought Sauron wasn't coming back. They didn't want to believe it,
Yeah, and that as long as the 9 rings, they knew that the one ring was still intact, lost, but still intact. Mm-hmm. And so they assumed correctly that meant the Nazgul would still be in existence because their 9 rings would have been slaves to the one.
Right.
All right. Well, I think that leaves us with just Ed left, right?
That's right.
All right, Ed, welcome back. How are you tonight?
I'm okay. Professor Mark, Professor West. I haven't done my homework tonight. I've been sick for most of the last.
I'm sorry to hear that.
I don't have anything. So I thought maybe we'd humiliate you instead.
Oh, well, that happens a lot. We're used to that.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Excellent. So we're all on with the plan. So it's 5 days from the end of Game of Thrones. So your choice of who is going to end up on the Iron Throne at the end, and then a month from now, when people listen, they can all
when this airs. Yeah. Oh goodness, I like
Alan's
that.
going to be a kind of a loss on this one because
I'm going to be a loss because I literally can't name more than a half dozen characters. I've never seen the show or read the books, so I'm going to have to defer.
It didn't stop you from.
No, it didn't.
Remember when we were on that game show,
on that trivia show, and I had no idea what character I was promoting for president, but clearly he was a very bad guy.
We ended up having to argue. So for Game of Thrones fans, we ended up having to argue basically like on a political campaign. We had to be on Team Ramsay Snow or Team John. Not John Aaron. Robert Aaron. Robin Aaron. Little Robin. John Aaron's son. And basically argue which one of those would be a better king.
And we didn't even get to choose. The other team chose their preference. That left us with some pretty bad guy, right?
Ramsay Snow, who's like the biggest monster in the series.
And so I had no idea who this guy was, and I'm trying to promote him for president.
Yeah.
It was But
funny. You did well, and we ended up winning that game on that answer.
Yeah, we did.
So you might do better at this than you think.
Well, that was only I only won that because the other team made the mistake of using their entire time telling listeners what a horrible candidate our guy was going to be.
That's true.
And that's just not what you do in a debate. You don't spend your time telling people how terrible your opponent is. You spend time talking about how great you are. And at the very end, maybe you compare. But so I was able to kind of just use some debate techniques without even knowing anything about the real candidates. So no, I would not be able to tell you. I mean, I would say Shawn Bean ends up on the throne, but I suspect he's already dead. Am I right?
He died like 6 episodes in 10 years ago.
Oh, all the way back at the beginning. Okay.
Yeah.
So I have no idea. Is there a dragon? Is she dead? This gal that like runs the dragons? I don't know her name.
No, she's still around, and she's making the news quite a bit this week, actually, when we're recording
is she?
this. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe she'll end up there. I don't know. I have no clue. Dragons help. Right. I mean,
so
Alan's take the throne.
Alan's guess is Daenerys.
I don't even know.
Yeah, that's her name. That's the mother of dragons character.
The dragon lady. Yeah, I prefer dragon lady to mother of dragons. Yeah, sounds better.
Oh man, this is going to come back to bite me, isn't it?
Almost certainly, because I'm literally guessing. I mean, I'm throwing a dart in the dark with my blindfold on, having been spun around 6 times.
Yeah, you have nothing to go on, and you haven't been watching the show for the last 10 years or however long it's been on. So nobody can blame you if you get it wrong. I think John's going to end up on the throne, Ed. I think it's going to be John.
All right, Ed. So what do you think? Just so you're officially on the record as well.
Okay, if I'm going to have to put something down on this, I'm going to go with Sansa.
Ooh, that's an interesting one.
I literally don't know whether to say it's a good one or not, but I'll trust your judgment, Shawn. Oh, goodness.
That's an interesting one. You know, that's kind of like my wife's theory right now. My wife thinks that Tyrion is just going to waltz in and take it from everybody. So that's
Tyrion upon Tuna?
Yes.
See, I got to bring it back full circle.
Tyrion with a Y, Tyrion Lannister. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I had no idea. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and mute Ed, but I have seen hands from both Arthur and Lee. So, Arthur, I'm going to unmute you first, and then Lee, you're next. Arthur?
I've actually watched this season of Game of Thrones live instead of getting it from the library, and I can only say if there's any justice, it's going to go to Hot Pie because he's got the best name in the whole show.
Well, that's just an awesome name. I will say that right there.
Yeah. Yeah, I would live in Hot Pie's Westeros. Why not?
Why does that sound wrong? All right, Lee, what do you have for us? Are you going to continue the Game of Thrones theme here?
Yeah, I haven't seen the show. I've just seen the memes. But from what I've heard, it's based on like the actual Tudor dynasty. So I would say whoever, and then like they all die, and they all die in the correct order. Theory spoilers. So whoever plays the Elizabeth character, which I'm guessing is the redhead from X-Men, whatever her name is probably it.
Shawn, do you have an idea? I have no idea.
Yeah, so that would be Sophie Turner's the actress, and then the character is Sansa, which is what Ed just said.
Which is what Ed said.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
Unless they're setting up a Victoria character, then she would win because she stays on the throne forever.
That's interesting.
Well, that she does. That's
true.
I mean,
I'd heard the theory that this was all kind of tied to the Wars of the Roses and, like the Starks and the Lannisters being like the Yorks and the Lancasters. But I don't know that period of English history well enough to know how it lines up. But I have to look into that. That's interesting.
Well, if I ever watch the show, I'll have to watch it through that lens.
Yep.
I'll have to watch it through some lens just to keep the blood from getting in my eyes from what I hear. But that's
unless you got one of those newfangled TVs, it won't actually spit blood at you.
No? Okay, well, that's good. Actually, I have a pretty nice TV, so it might do that. But, well, I think that actually leads us to an opportunity to get a little bit of a round 2. I don't know if we'll be able to get a full question from everybody in round 2, but Rob and then Arthur, we'll start with you guys, then we'll go from there, okay? Rob.
So this question is for Shawn, and it's definitely a gimme, although you can both answer.
Okay.
Shawn, as the one in Texas right now, do you think that the Hobbits had brisket?
Oh, I like the question.
Wow.
Was there any sign at all that they had beef?
They must have had
We know
beef.
they talk about bacon, and we talk about salted pork, and we talk about, but those might have just been because they were meats that could be cured and therefore could be taken on a journey.
They must have had beef. I mean,
yeah. Didn't he order a double cheeseburger at the? No, I'm just kidding. No.
Oh man, this is a tough one. I tend to think they didn't. I don't see hobbits taking that long to cook something.
No, that's probably true.
I think they want to cook it quickly and eat it really simple. Whereas, as every Texan knows, good brisket is not simple. It's a long labor of love kind of process.
I mean, the hobbits would have to endure like 6 meals while their brisket was cooking.
Yeah.
Because they eat so frequently. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to probably land on no. I'm not sure that they have. I mean, I know they talked about cold chicken, and I know they talked about pork products. Oh, but you know what? They talk about butter. They talk about dairy. So, yeah, of course
that's just it. They must have had, they must have had dairy, but
did they kill them for beef?
Did they actually kill them for meat?
Was cheese more important to them, or was the beef more important to them?
Well, I mean, you can get milk. I mean,
you can't get cheese from a cow you've just made a hamburger out of. That's for sure.
But you can get milk from them for a while and then turn them into meat. I said very crassly.
I know, seriously. We have just absolutely offended any vegan in our audience. They probably turned off the show now. We do apologize for that, but it wasn't our question.
If they came this far with all of our bacon talk, I think
that's true. I think
they're not easily offended. I think no, but I'm curious to know what Rob thinks.
Oh, okay. Rob, what's your thought on your own question?
I think that they must have had brisket. Otherwise, as a society, they wouldn't have been so happy.
Ah, there you go.
Fair enough.
I do like the theory behind it. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's fair. And I probably lose my Texan card for not saying that, but
that's true. They would have been far more warlike if they didn't have brisket.
Yeah.
Arthur, I saw your hand up next. What do you have for us in round 2?
It relates to my old friend Bombadil.
Okay.
By the way, Old Man Willow was able to swallow a hobbit, so he's larger on the inside than the outside, and Tom, he is the master, so Old Man Willow is his TARDIS. Be that as it may.
Oh, man, I love it.
It's always been a presumption that Tom is one of these spirits from before the creation of the world.
Right.
And we know that in general, those guys were either on one side or the other.
Mm-hmm.
Tom doesn't step outside his country. Old Man Willow is clearly inside his country.
True.
The Barrow-wights are clearly inside his country. Tom clearly is capable of dealing with these critters, but he doesn't.
Yeah.
Can we speculate on why he doesn't take sides?
That's a very good question. I remember looking at that when we had our lengthy discussion on Tom a few weeks back, right, Shawn?
I think so, yeah.
There was a letter, I think, where he points out that Tom didn't try to
dominate or fix. You were going to say fix, and I think that works.
Yeah,
well.
Fix or repair or what's the word? Rehabilitate, perhaps. He wasn't trying to remedy Old Man Willow. And so you wonder, it's more of, is it because of that neutrality like we talked about?
One thing Tolkien said is that he observes. You know, his main function is to be out there observing and kind of influencing nature to a lesser degree. But Tolkien compared him to kind of a scientist, kind of observing and not trying to affect or maybe not even influence the natural world that much. And so I think that's probably why maybe to try and drive them out would have been too close to domination for Tom. And that's just
maybe.
Not part of
we
his
talked
nature.
about that, what it means to be master. It's different than how a lot of people might understand that word. It doesn't mean that he is the authority, though he clearly has the ability to command Old Man Willow. Master in the sense that he just has knowledge. And for that, I'm going to go to letter 153. Tolkien explains that Goldberry adds as a concession to Frodo's question about who is he, that he is master in a peculiar way. He has no fear and no desire of possession or domination at all. And here's the line: he merely knows and understands about such things as concern him in his natural little realm. He hardly even judges, and as far as can be seen, makes no effort to reform or remove even the willow. Now, I know that doesn't answer the question, because the question is, why does he make no effort to reform or remove? But I think it clarifies a little bit that it's tied into his nature as master and how master means something different in that context. It's just knowledge. It's just experience and wisdom. It's not
wisdom. I think it's a good way of putting it.
Authority in a
it's not control.
Legal, right. It's not control. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we also land, Arthur, I heard in your question, the assumption that Tom is one of the spirits from before the creation of Arda. I think where we landed in terms of Tom, just some of the way things are worded and some of the secondary source materials, we came to the idea that maybe Tom wasn't a spirit from outside Arda. Maybe he actually came from within Arda, and maybe he was, one of the first things created after Arda was created. So maybe he didn't come from outside, and maybe he didn't feel the need to take sides. Maybe he wasn't part of that, the Melkor versus Iluvatar music at the beginning, and he didn't feel the need to align himself. I think we
speculated, didn't we both land on him being the essentially the spirit of Arda itself, that when Arda was made, when Iluvatar spoke it into existence and the Valar then had to shape it, prior to them shaping it, he existed?
Something like that, or the spirit or a spirit of Arda. I think I was kind of thinking maybe there might be other Toms out there.
Oh, there might be other regional. Yeah.
But I don't think you quite got there. I think we both just kind of had sort of slightly different ideas about that. But
how that's different from a Vala,
from an Ainu that came in from outside. Yeah.
Right.
Sort of a spontaneous generation of Arda.
Exactly. Instead of being a direct creation of Iluvatar's thought like all the Ainur are, he ends up being a side effect, if you will, of the creation of Arda.
Right.
A spiritual side effect.
Yeah. And that's possible because Iluvatar did put the flame imperishable at the heart of the world.
Absolutely.
And so it's there. So it could spontaneously create life, maybe.
Yeah.
Apparently it seems that way.
Maybe. It's the Genesis Project. I mean, I know it's a Star Trek reference, but
I have seen that one, so I know that one.
Okay, yeah. So I think that might be where we land on that. I think that neutrality maybe comes more from his nature than from anything else.
Yeah.
But it is an interesting thing to speculate on. Why? I mean, Tom, everything about Tom is interesting to speculate on. But the idea of why he doesn't, why doesn't he destroy all the Barrow Wights? Why doesn't he go to all the Barrows and kick them out? Well, I don't know. Why doesn't he tell Old Man Willow to leave? Go, take a hike, go someplace else. It's because that's where Old Man Willow belongs, and Tom belongs near there to sing and to, hopefully rescue any people straying by Old Man Willow. But yeah,
could be.
All right. Well, I think I saw DeMay's hand next, and then Scotch, and then Lee. So we're going to go ahead and go with DeMay first. DeMay, welcome back.
Hi there. I think this is a fairly short question, but you can determine it. It's a map question from The Hobbit.
Oh, okay.
There is a map in The Hobbit that shows the line of the wild.
Yes.
And it shows that Rivendell is over the wild. But is it really? Is Rivendell over the wild? It seems like civilization. So I was wondering about that and thinking about back to a couple of years ago when I had students, when we read The Hobbit, who were confrontational about everything. And incidentally, she is going into 8th grade. She stops by all the time to talk about The Hobbit because her bus picks up at my school.
Oh, okay.
So I was thinking about her, kind of channeling her whenever it comes to this. Is Rivendell really over the wild? It's on the map as over the wild, but it's civilized.
Okay, well, let's take a look. Shawn, something about the civilized veneer?
I'm looking at, that's me, civilized veneer.
There you go.
Secretly wild.
Sorry, I was thinking of a Rush song. I was thinking of the heart of a lonely hunter, guards a dangerous frontier. The balance can sometimes fail. Strong emotions can tip the scale. Lock and Key.
Lock and Key.
Yeah. Boy, it took me a while.
I'll admit, I had to look it up. I'm like, I totally know that song, but I can't remember which one it is.
And I can picture the album cover. It's red with those little globes on it.
Yeah, Hold Your Fire, the red one.
I couldn't remember the name of the album either. That was the problem.
Yeah.
All right.
I totally didn't pick up on that, but yeah, I'm looking at chapter 3 of The Hobbit, and Gandalf does say, "You are come to the very edge of the wild, as some of you may know. Mm-hmm. Hidden somewhere ahead of us is the fair valley of Rivendell, where Elrond lives in the last homely house." So, it does seem that Rivendell is over the edge of the wild.
Oh, wow.
It is apparently a little oasis, a little pocket of civilization.
Yeah.
Within the wild.
That reminds me, I think in a recent episode where I said something about the line of the wild being on the other side of the Misty Mountains. Clearly, I was wrong.
Oh. That's right. You did,
I don't know why I said that either, because I knew full well the Misty Mountains are in the wild. That's the whole point.
Well, to be fair, I mean,
I'm correcting myself now.
The phrase "the edge of the wild" in The Hobbit appears a lot more, on the other side of the Misty Mountains than it does.
Right. Because I think we first start talking about it at length when they end up dealing with the wolves and the goblins and out of the frying pan. But I think something can be over the edge of the wild and yet still be civilization.
Even Beorn's house is,
Exactly. Beorn's house. It's still the wild, but it is a refuge within the wild. It is a pocket of civilization within the wild, as opposed to, let's say, a pocket of the wild within civilization, like maybe the Trollshaws. Right? That might be an example of the other way around, where you have a pocket of wilderness that's not all the way over in the wild yet.
Right.
But yeah, just a pocket of civilization in the wilderness. What say you, Shawn?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
An oasis in the wild.
I like that. An oasis. That's a great way to put it. Early on, too. I mean, you're not weeks into your journey into the wild when you come across it. It's almost like, all right, well, now you're here in the wild. Here's your last, it's your last rest stop for the next 183 miles.
Well, right. And just the fact that it's called the last homely house, I mean, that signifies the fact that it's a special place in a region that doesn't have many homely houses.
That's true.
So, I think that underscores the idea that it's an oasis or a pocket of civilization in the wild.
Excellent. All right. Well, I also saw Scotch's hand. So, Scotch, fire away. What do you got for us for round 2?
Just a real quick talk about Tom. He always keeps coming up.
We can never get rid of Tom, can we, Shawn?
We can't get rid of Tom. My quick thoughts.
All right.
I just can't help myself.
That's all right.
Everyone has a theory, so I'm going to throw out mine.
Good.
I feel like maybe Tolkien set the rules of the book. And I feel like maybe Tom is one of the characters who gets the rules and lives by the rules and understands the rules, and he's the good guy. And maybe someone like Ungoliant or Sauron also gets the rules and is sort of on the dark side.
Right.
But that's just my quick little comment about Tom. Everybody has to have their Tom at the book.
Everybody does have to have their Tom theory, yeah.
So like he kind of gets it, so he lives by those rules. But I think maybe Goldberry is actually the one in charge. But anyway,
so you're saying Tom maybe has an insight into the workings of the world that even other characters, maybe even some of the Ainur, don't have.
Exactly, and I feel like that might be why he sees the ring. He's like, okay, Tolkien wrote about the ring.
Yeah.
No problem. Like Sauron could walk into his front door and Tom would be like, okay, you're dead. Go away. I get it.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. Thank you. But my question, I tackled the Silmarillion for the 3rd time, and I thought I understood. I went down to Bermuda. I sat by the pool. I read it for 3 days straight. And that's the best way to read the Silmarillion.
Boy, I would say, that would be a great way to read the Silmarillion on the beach in Bermuda. Yeah.
And I thought I understood it. And I thought that the fall of Gondolin, everyone has heard about that.
Yeah.
And it was the Maeglin, son of Eol, was wandering around. He shouldn't have been wandering around, and he was caught. He betrayed it. And I thought I understood it. But then I read that it was Hurin was tortured, and then also he betrayed the location. So
he accidentally betrayed the general area. Right. I mean, he because after he was released, he went back there.
Yeah.
Near the hidden pass that would have gotten him in, and he kept shouting for Turgon
and the eagles and whatnot.
And the eagles saw him, and certainly the spies of Morgoth saw him, so they knew that this was the region where they would find Gondolin eventually. But as far as the actual location, only Maeglin, actually gave that information away. That was the cool thing about Hurin. He never broke under torture.
Right.
Okay, I've always been confused by that spot because I thought I understood it, but then it was who was the one who betrayed me.
Yeah, it was definitely Maeglin. Bad guy.
And if I recall, it was Hurin's indiscretion going there and kind of shouting for Turgon, basically. That, like you said, Alan, that's what alerted Morgoth to the general area. And once Morgoth knew the general area, that's when he could put his spies there, and then that's how he ended up catching Maeglin. So the Hurin episode did lead to the Maeglin episode.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Hurin was absolutely not intentionally betraying. It was just he was kind of played. He was Morgoth's pawn. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure he was standing outside the pass saying, "Turgon, take me away." Sorry. Okay. There's a reference to an old commercial that very few people will get, but Turgon's lesser-known brother, Calgon.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Scotch.
The Fall of Gondolin. That charming Myglin. You know, we put Myglin in the same boat as Feanor, and we would bash him as much, except that nobody tries to defend him like they do Feanor. Have you noticed? Nobody sits around saying, Myglin was just misunderstood.
Right. Feanor throws off like the anti-hero vibe and all that stuff. Myglin just throws off the creepy cousin vibe.
Seriously, the very creepy cousin vibe. You're not kidding. All right. Well, Lee, what do you have for us in round 2?
Pretty simple question. You guys have referenced a few times I don't want to say last battle, but the master plan.
The Dagor-Dagorath
battle, because in the Narnia story, the whole final book by Lewis in the Narnia series is pretty much that, right? You get his version. And where can I find what you've referenced? Just to make it simple, where can I find that? Because that's something I've always, once I connected how much of mythology this was, I've always wondered where that piece was.
Happy to help you find that. Obviously, it's going to be in one of the volumes of History of Middle-earth, but let me find out exactly where.
I believe it's 4 and 5.
Yeah, it's included in both the Shaping of Middle-earth and the Lost Road, but most of it is going to be in the Shaping of Middle-earth, so that's going to be volume 4. You're right.
I'm trying to remember if it's in Morgoth's Ring, though, because I feel like it's something he was kind of playing with earlier in drafting the Legendarium. And
well, I think the bit in Morgoth's Ring is the part where we learned that it was abandoned by Tolkien, that he didn't.
Okay, maybe
where he
that's
talks
it.
About that.
Yeah, it's in a few places in the History of Middle-earth. Definitely look at volume 4 and volume 5 first.
Yeah, that's where you're going to find.
So that's the Shaping of Middle-earth and the Lost Road.
You know what's interesting is it's actually also mentioned, believe it or not, in Unfinished Tales in the section on the Astari.
Is it?
And it's in that section where there's some speculation about who was Gandalf, that he might have actually been the last appearance of Manwë himself, and that Tolkien says, I don't know the truth of the matter, and if I did, it would be a mistake to be more explicit than Gandalf was, but I think it was not so. Manwë will not descend from the mountain until the Dagor-Dagorath and the coming of the end when Melkor returns. And then there's a footnote where Christopher says that it's a reference to the second prophecy of Mandos, which doesn't appear in the Silmarillion. And I love what he says here. Its elucidation cannot be attempted here, since it would require some account of the history of the mythology in relation to the published version. In other words, I am not going to write a book for this footnote.
Right. That's great.
Well said, Christopher. Well said. Well, folks, I think that's going to go ahead and wrap it up for tonight. It was a great discussion. We want to thank each of you for joining us for Questions After Nightfall. We do hope that you'll be able to join us again for the next one, sometime in September, we think. And folks listening at home, we hope you will all join us again next week for another special episode.
That's right. Folks, we had a chance recently to sit down with the legendary artist Greg Hildebrandt. As one half of the brothers Hildebrandt with his twin brother Tim, Greg illustrated the J.R.R. Tolkien calendars from 1976 to 1978, and his work has been iconic among fantasy and science fiction fans for decades. We had a chance to talk to him about his Tolkien work and other projects, his career, and more.
And what a fantastic storyteller he was, too. Absolutely entertaining, and we can't wait to share the conversation with you.
So great. A lot of fun. And we're going to be releasing that next week as episode 131.
That's correct. Now, the week after that, we're going to be off for the 4th of July. But the week after that, we'll be back into the narrative with episode 132, the first part of Flight to the Ford. Now, it's hard to believe, but that is the last chapter in Book 1 and our last chapter of Season 3.
But we will be spending 3 episodes on that chapter to give it the full Prancing Pony podcast treatment.
That we will. And then we'll be bringing you a little something special to close out the season, but that's all we're going to say about it for now. Now, while you wait for all that, as we said in the beginning of this episode, if you want to get in on the next Questions After Nightfall, be sure to visit patreon.com/prancingponypod. And when you join at the Gift of Gondor level or higher, you'll also get access to exclusive content, like a full-length bonus episode every quarter, along with short postscripts to each of our chapter-based episodes.
Joining at that level is also going to get you access to our Discord server, where you'll get a chance to listen in live during an episode recording. Hear our goofs, our edits, our outtakes, and all the silly things that don't even make our outtakes real, not to mention getting a sneak peek at an episode weeks before everyone else.
That's right. And we've also recently reached our next goal of setting up a monthly live hangout with us on Discord. So you want to listen in live during an episode recording or get a chance to hang out with us once a month? Well, visit patreon.com/prancingponypod.
And if you're looking for a new Tolkien book, check out the official library pages at our website, theprancingponypodcast.com, where we put together a set of links for our listeners to all the books we've ever mentioned on the show, Tolkien or otherwise. And if you wouldn't mind posting a review on iTunes, we'd really be grateful for that. That increases our visibility. That means more new listeners, more great questions for Barliman, more discussion on social media, and a livelier Tolkien community.
That it does. And we should have our next t-shirt available for sale by the time this episode airs. Now, we're still confirming which design, which product, which colors that we're going to be making available this time around. But be sure to check out our Facebook page. That's @PrancingPonyPod for more details. Now, speaking of social media, it is really helpful if you share us. Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, wherever there are Tolkien fans, please let them know about us. Folks, that's going to wrap it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast.
Thanks again for listening, and thank you for making our common room on Facebook such a fun place to spend time. We want all of you to be a part of this conversation, and it doesn't stop when the episode ends. See the comments, questions, corrections, and more on Facebook @The Prancing Pony Podcast, on Twitter @PrancingPonyPod, and on Instagram @PrancingPonyPod.
And a very special thank you to our patrons at the Kier Dance contribution tier, to May in Alaska, who was with us tonight, James in Virginia, Tamsin in Minnesota, Emily in Texas, and Chad in Texas. Thank you all.
Make sure you don't miss any episodes of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Subscribe to the show through iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app.
And one last thing as always, don't forget to send your thoughts, comments, and most of all, your best questions. We love opinion-based questions that require little to no research. They're our favorites. Send those in to Barliman @theprancingponypodcast.com. We'll try to get them into our next show. Well, however long we've had, it is still far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time,
farewell, friends.